Okay, now that we have our cubes created and it's inside of UE4, the next thing we're going to be taking a look at is how to build materials and also make a material instance. So a material instance is after you set up a base material, you can make an instance of it and then change the parameters on that and then feed that into a bunch of different models. So it's actually a pretty powerful system that they've set up. So let's look into this. First thing we're going to do, I'm going to do a little house cleaning here, and this is a mesh, and so I'm going to right click in here and say new folder and call this mesh like that. And we could just go ahead and click and drag our model into that area and say move here. You could copy it if you want. That just makes a copy of it, but we're just going to move it. So this is how you can copy something from one area and move it to another folder, or just move it. So that's pretty nice to know. The other thing we're going to do is make another folder. Just right click in here and say new folder, and let's just call this materials. And then within materials, we're going to double click and go in there, and then right click, and then we're going to say material and create a material right here. So let's just call this m underscore cube base material, because I've already got the M in front is supposed to mean material, so let's leave it something like that. And we can just double click on this thing and open up the material. Now, one thing that's kind of neat is that if you have a mesh and you want to see what the material is that you're creating and you want to see what it looks like while you're creating the thing, you can actually put it in here with this little teapot. Let's just go to the mesh folder that we just made, click on the model, have it selected and highlighted, and then once highlighted, click on this little teapot icon. Now again, you're going to be looking at the model with the material that you're going to be building. So controls in here, you can just click, left click, and you can rotate around, you can right click and zoom in and out, and you can middle click and pan. I believe you can also tap F and then hold down Alt and click around. So just get used to those controls. The other thing you can do is hold down L and then click and drag, and you can move your light source around. So you're probably going to want to have it somewhere in here, something like that. Okay, so now that I've got that kind of established, I'm going to double click on this and expand this window. And navigation in here, if you hold down right mouse button and click and drag, it'll move. You can do your middle mouse scroll wheel and it'll zoom in and out. So that's how you kind of zoom in and out and move this thing around. First thing I want to do is a base color. So watch this. If you hold down 1 and tap, if you hold down 2 and tap, if you hold down 3 and tap, if you hold down 4 and tap, you'll get a constant one. So if we go to constants, basically where you see we got this constant, which is this, and we've got hold down 2, you do a constant 2 vector and do a constant 3 vector and a constant 4 vector. So you can see this is 1 value, 2 values, 3 values, 4 values. Basically we want to do something with color, so we need something that's got 3 values. And so again, that would just be holding down 3 and then clicking like that. And we're going to feed this into the base color area. I'm going to get rid of this one. I'm just going to select it and hit delete or backspace. And we can give it a base color of mid gray, like 0.5, something like that. And hit OK. So we can just double click on this at any point and use this as a color picker. And that comes in pretty handy. Now, if I want to control these parameters in a different material, we're going to convert this to a parameter. So we're going to right click on this and say convert to parameter, and we're going to give it a name. So we'll just name it the same thing we got here. We can call this base color. And what this is going to allow us to do is dynamically change these values and these colors directly in the engine. So it's going to come in really handy for us. So it's going to take a little time just to set some things up, but it won't be that big of a deal. We'll just hold down 1 and then click for metallic, hold down 1 and click for specular, 1 and click for roughness, and let's just drag this out to each one of these like this. And again, we can click it, right click, say convert to parameter, and then let's just call this metallic. like this. And let's go ahead and convert this to a parameter. Let's call this specular, like this. And I didn't mean to do specular none. Let's just do specular. I'm not the best typer in the world. That's all right. Right click on here, convert to parameter, and I'll call this roughness. Like that. And let's go here and let's hold down 3 and then click. We can push this into emissive color. Let's convert this to a parameter and let's call this emiss, like this. And I think that'll be enough for us for now. So let's take a look at some of these different options for this. Obviously, if we double click on this and we make the color and you make it something like red, it's going to make the object red, right? Pretty straightforward. I'm just going to again leave this at 0.5 for the value and try to make this a gray kind of color. Actually, I need to push this right in here for the saturation needs to be 0, like this, and the value 0.5. That'll give us this gray. Now, if we want something to feel metallic, 0 means it's not metallic at all. There's 0% metallic. But if we want it to be fully metallic, we can give this a value of 1. And you can see now it's nice and kind of shiny, right? So if we want the roughness of this, the roughness is set to 0. So there is no roughness. Think about a glass table. The glass table is very, very smooth. It's not rough at all. So it's got a value of 0. But if we want this thing to feel more matte, like carpet or something like that, maybe we'll do like something like 0.85 for the roughness. And you can see, and now at this point, there is some specularity on it, but it's very, very light and it's very, very matte. If you want this to have no roughness, you can put this at a value of 1. Or actually, if you want it to feel very rough, you put it at a value of 1. Again, if no roughness would be 0. So you can see there is no specularity on it at that point. If we put it at 0.5, you can see we've got some specularity going on this thing, and it is somewhat, somewhat reflective. And if we take the metallic and we put that back down to 0, you can see this is kind of what it looks like. Feels a bit more plastic at that point. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit and then hold down L and move my light source around right about there. Okay, and I'm just going to right click and zoom in and out a little like that. And so let's put this down at maybe 0.25 so we can see the specularity pretty easily, like that. Now if we put specular is at 0, so if I put that default value at 1, I think you're going to see this specularity a lot better, right? This is kind of like a mask and it kind of limits things. So if we put that at 0, you can see it kind of limits the specularity. So let's just put that at 1, like that. And now if you want something to feel like it's kind of self-illuminating, if we double click on this and let's say we make it kind of like this orangish kind of color, like that, and I'll hit OK. You can see it's starting to feel like it's self-illuminating. Now if I double click on this and we go to the value and we plug in something like 10, check this out, it starts to glow. If you do something like 100, it's going to glow very, very intense at that point. So I'm just going to put this at 0 just because we don't want our object to necessarily feel like it's glowing. But we're just going to give ourselves some control for this. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to show you guys a node that I really like quite a bit, and it's kind of fake rim lighting. If you right click and say Fresnel, so if we do type in FRES and we can get this Fresnel node like this, what we can do is basically we can get some values for this. Let's hold down 1 for this exponent in, hold down 1 for this one here. And then for the normals, let's just right click and then do normals type in normals, and we're going to find pixels normals world space. And that's just grabbing the normals from the world and it plugs it in here. So don't worry about that too much. The exponent is like how far the, how big the fall off is for this. So if I put this at something like 10, and something interesting is you can right click on any of the nodes and say start previewing nodes, so you can see just exactly what that thing is doing on the object before you feed it into anything else. And so basically it's giving this kind of fake kind of rim thing. If we put this at 20, I think it makes it even. Let's see, if I do 2, it's going to make it really, really broad across the object. It's not what I want. I want something kind of right around in there, like that. And I can right click and say stop previewing node. So what I'm going to do is take this and I want to give it a color. So what we could do is, if you right click on here and say start previewing node, you can see that this thing is just black and white right at this point. So if you get used to like Photoshop or something else like that, you're able to take the color and you're able to multiply it. And if you multiply it by something that's like black or white, the white areas become something that becomes the color. So let's right click here and say stop previewing node. Let's right click in here and say type in mult for multiply, and you can see we got this here. Now multiply, you can multiply values or colors or things like that. So we'll just pipe this into the slot A and let's give it a color. So hold down 3 and then click, and that's going to give us a color. And then maybe I want this to be like a blue kind of color or something around in there like that, and we'll give it a high value like this, maybe 2, and then plug this in here. Now if we right click on the multiply and say start previewing node, you can see what this thing is going to kind of do for us. So let's right click, say stop previewing node, and so then we've got this overall emissive color that we've got. And what we can do is take the result of this little thing over here. So I'm going to select it all, and if I want, I can hit C and put a comment around it. And then I can type in and say Fresnel like that. And now I've got this thing that I can click and drag, and I can rearrange this, and I can click and drag in here, and I can move the whole thing around, which is kind of cool. And if I move this emiss, if I do an add, so I'm going to right click on here and say add and do an add node, I can add the result of this emissive plus this Fresnel, and then pipe this all into the emissive. So then now we've got what we had before plus this thing here. Now remember, if we went to this thing and we said, the emissive color is going to be like this kind of red thing, we would have this red going on with maybe this kind of bluish kind of color that we got. And we could crank up the value of this thing really high like this. So you're getting some kind of interesting effects at that point. I don't really want this that high. I'll just put the default value of this, set this to 1, and put this back down to get to 0. So again, this is going to become like just a base material that we can kind of play around with and have some fun with. So let's hit save like this. And after it saves, we'll go ahead and close this down. So this becomes our new material that we just made. Now if we go to our mesh, here's something that's kind of interesting. If we go to mesh, double click it and open it up in the static mesh viewer window, remember, for all the meshes that we have for this cube, here's the material for it. Now after we made that material that we have, we can click and populate it with this little arrow right here. So it puts that material onto it. So I can zoom in on it and take a look. So here's the material. I can hit save for that. And let's check the materials in the world. So you can see how we already drug these cubes out, and it's going to reflect those changes that we made in the static mesh viewer. So that's one way of like kind of filling things with materials. The other thing we can do is make that material instance that we talked about. So we're going to go to the materials area, we're going to click our material, and then we're going to right click over it and say create material instance. And then now you can see it's going to give us the name, and then it's going to give us this instance at the end. So let's say I want to make this like a red material. So I'll type in red on there and do instance. If we double click on this, it's not going to be looking like the material editor, but basically all those parameters that we set up, if we want to change the values on there. So let's take a look at this material that we got going on here. And you can see, remember, we gave a name to all these different parameters. So here's our base color, metallic, emiss. One thing I didn't do, and we should probably do this, is give parameters for these colors. So right click and say convert to parameter. You can do this at any point, and we can give it a name of Fresnel. Do color like that. So we'll do a name, something like that. Then we can right click and convert this to parameter and call this Fresnel exponent in. And we'll do this one last one, convert to parameter, and we'll call this Fresnel, and I'll just type in BRF for that, base reflection fraction. It'll make a little more sense when we can start playing around with these values. So if I hit save, here's kind of the cool thing, that these things that we just put in there for parameters will actually show up in this material instance. So if you've made a bunch of material instances, you can go back to the parent material at any point and put these things in, and now you've got these new controls. So I can click on these little boxes, and that'll open up an area for us to kind of play around with these values. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take one of these cubes and I'm going to click and drag onto this. Let's see if that actually fills it with the instance. It will. So the other thing you can do is in the details panel, you can select that material instance, and then you can hit this little arrow key and populate it there. So that's different ways of taking the model and filling it. It won't look any different until we start changing the parameters. So here's the power of this whole material instance thing. So we can click on here, and now we can make this red, and you can see, we can see in real time in the engine the updating of this. So I'm going to click off of that so we can kind of see some of this thing. And again, we can change the emissive, maybe make this kind of an orange kind of color, something like that. Maybe I'll just give it just a little bit of emissive like that. We can change the Fresnel color, and we can make that orange. So let's do that, and then take the value. I can really crank that thing up maybe. And you can see directly in the viewer here, you can see the exact kind of values that you're going to get in here. So if you want this thing to really feel like a light is reflecting off of this thing, hit OK for that. We've got our metallic parameter, so if we put that up to 1, you can see something like that. Our roughness, if we put that down to 0, now it becomes really kind of reflective at that point. If we tone back the specularity, let's put that at 0. It doesn't feel like it does a whole lot, but I just wanted to put the control in there anyways. And you can see it's going to give us the controls, or the actual parent material in this area, and show us the parent material. So here's also this area, like if we want the Fresnel, if we want to control that, you can see we can interactively see this a bit better now for what this is going to do for the Fresnel exponent. And if we take this and pull this thing up, this really kind of blows the whole thing out, or it kind of limits that Fresnel effect. And as it gets closer to 0, I think that's probably what you're gonna want. And let's put this at 0, and we'll pull this thing down kind of like this. So we've got a very metallic kind of looking cube, and just going to pull the base, the overall emissive down, and this Fresnel color, it's really super high, so we'll do something like 20 or something like that. And so I think that's looking pretty cool. So let's hit save. Now here's something very interesting. You can actually take an instance and you can make another instance of it. So right click in there and say create material instance, and then this one, instead of being red, let's call this blue, and I want to keep all the parameters exactly the same except for I'm going to make it blue. So I can middle mouse, or actually just click and drag this onto here, and that's going to fill it with this red. And let's double click on it because we called it blue. Let's go to the base color, and we're only going to change that. We check this and we can push it to blue like that and save. And maybe we'll make one more. So I'm just going to right click and say create material instance, and so let's call this green. And we'll make this one green. Gotta open this up like this. Hit OK, save it, and I'll drag it onto this cube. So you can see that now we've got these different cubes. They're different material types. At least some of the the parameters are changed on it. You're going to be able to kind of control this stuff. If I want to make this thing not so metallic, I can pull this down to 0, something like that. And you can see I'm on the fly changing that material type. And if I don't want it to have reflectivity, I can change the roughness of that, make it maybe 0.5, change the emissive and the Fresnel, just drag that down, something like that. Maybe change the specularity. Let me see if I can overdrive that. It doesn't really do much of anything. So this is going to feel a little bit more kind of like a plastic material at that point. So this is a way that you can create materials and set up material instances, and then you can change the different parameters of the materials. So I'm just going to close this down. One thing I did notice about the mesh, if I take a look at this and I double click on it and look at it in the static mesh viewer, and I kind of zoom in on this, it's got kind of hard edges at this point. So I'm going to go back to Maya real quick, and if we zoom in on Maya, so I'm going to zoom in here. When I did that bevel, it made these hard edges on the model. So let's get rid of that. Let's go ahead and select the model. Let's go ahead and say mesh display and say unlock normals, and that'll make sure if there's any kind of weird stuff going on with your normals on your mesh, it'll unlock it. And then we'll go mesh display and we'll say soften edge, and now we've got nice soft bevels. We want to get rid of the history on it, so again Alt Shift D deletes history, or you can go to edit, delete by type history, and let's re-export the model out. So let's say file, export selection. We'll export it, and again I threw that on the desktop. I don't suggest you guys do that. I suggest you guys keep your stuff organized, but I'm just doing this temporarily. I'll export directly over the model that I had, and I'll say, do you want to replace it? Now let's go back to Unreal, and here's the thing. This is kind of cool. So let's get really close to the model. You can see it's got these hard edges like this. And if I take the model and I right click on it, we can say re-import. And if you kept the model where it was at and it remembers that location, it'll re-import the model and do the changes to it. So now you can see those edges have changed. I can right click in here and say save like this. And now we've just established a pipeline between UE4 and Maya for updating our art and getting some predictable results at that point. Okay, so again, we can play and we can kind of go and take a look at the models that we've actually created inside of the game like that. And so that's how you're going to establish your scale, some materials, and a pipeline to move back and forth between Maya and UE4.